episode of Ex-Muslim Somali Voices. This is a channel dedicated to hearing the voices and stories of ex-Muslims from the Somali community who face, let's put it, peculiar problems with their lack of faith, and the reaction to apostasy is quite harsh. And today we have a young woman who I admire quite well for her feminism and for her blogging and for her the stuff that she does. Twitter handle, and I will put it on the screen, is Gabariskufilan. But Fadumo, welcome.
Thank you.
If you want to maybe introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do and kind of stuff that I see you posting online, and that would be great.
Okay. So my name is Fadumo. I run a blog called Gabariskufilan, and it's a solo female travel blog that focuses on travel across the African diaspora. So I pick countries that have a legacy or importance in the African diaspora and movements towards Black liberation. And so I go there and I by myself, and I connect with people and I learn about their struggles and the shared commonalities across the African diaspora. And I also talk about leaving Islam, and I talk about feminism a lot, and what it's done for me in terms of improving my outlook, self-esteem, confidence, how I make sense of the world around me as a first generation Somali American, and also as somebody who is unapologetically pro-Black. And I think that's one of the driving forces of my apostasy, is that I did not feel like Black people were being treated equally and being treated with dignity, and that Black liberation was at the forefront of Islam, which it's not. And so for me, it just made sense. You know, I'm Black and a woman, and so those are two things that are, those two identities are incredibly important to me, and those two identities have not yet been liberated. And so, yeah, that's the gist of my blog.
Yeah, and the name of your blog, Gabariskufilan, do you mind telling our audience what it actually means in your own words?
In my own words, Gabariskufilan means a woman who's enough for herself. That's the translation in English. And I named my blog Gabariskufilan because that's a huge part of my identity. Like, you know, always be Gabariskufilan, like, you know, be an independent woman, don't rely on anybody. Coming from a community where women are extremely disenfranchised and oppressed and face a lot of violence and just a lot of hardship for being women. And so I think it's very important for me to center in my feminism with Black liberation, which a lot of times those two movements are kind of divorced from each other. And I noticed that when I went to Colombia and when I went to Trinidad and Tobago, and I learned about Black liberation in those countries, and each of those movements, whether it's Ghana, whether it's, you know, Cuba, they always ignored the struggles of women, and they always kind of try to minimize and diminish the issues that women face. And so it's like, okay, but let us get our freedom first, and then we'll worry about gender-based violence.
Yeah, and that's it's interesting you bring it up, because I do notice that as well, and I do observe. Sometimes I'm like, is this because within the Black communities, misogyny and patriarchal mindsets are still very rife? Yeah. Within and that's like a kind of parallel in that sense, to some degree. But it's important that you brought it up, because I do observe it as well.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I talk about, and just my own journey of like into my own womanhood. And I started this blog like 2 years ago, and I've just grown so much in those 2 years, and like being able to chronicle my journey and like document the things that I experience, and the places that I visit are very interesting, and they're not, you know, typical of places that we visit, right? Places like people like us. And so I think highlighting that is also very important.
Okay. I've been following your blog for a while and your Twitter handle. And I noticed that your Twitter handle is unapologetically Madhu lover. Is that
Yeah.
something you want to talk about?
It's kind of a joke because you know I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of times Somali girls who are pro-black were always accused of being pro-black because we like and for me I'm black, right? Like I think that that's another issue I have with the being Muslim. Like I think that being Muslim kind of forced me to put my blackness in the back seat and put my womanness in the back seat and only talk about being Muslim, right? And so like for me, I've always believed that my blackness and my womanness was more important than being Muslim because for me like that's how the world, even in the Muslim world, that's how I was treated. My people saw my blackness and my womanness first, and so um that's why it's kind of a joke, and I'm like, okay, I'm unapologetically,
Okay.
I
Okay.
love my middle people.
No, but it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And maybe that brings me to a subject that I normally hear from, which is kind of very ridiculous actually, from Somalis. I don't know. When I read the history, it's probably stems from the Arab slavery period, where there's a bunch of Somali people saying, no, we're closer to Arab, we're not really black.
Mhm.
and,
Yeah.
and I find it quite ridiculous. And is this something you also observe with conversations you have with people from the Somali community?
Yes. I think that because blackness is so demonized, right? Like
Mm.
reading the Bible and reading the Quran, they always allude to darkness coming out of the darkness, and that darkness is bad and being light is good, and so there's always that um, allegorical connotation of blackness being demonized, being um, sinful, being, immoral. And so I think that because there's such a stigma of being black, that Somali people oftentimes want to associate more with being Muslim because it kind of makes them less black in a way, like, and so I don't know. That's how I see it. I know it's ridiculous, but like
Yeah.
that's kind of what I see them, because it's so negative, and so for them to cling on to something that's not black, right? And Islam is not inherently black. It was not started by a black person. It was not, meant to liberate black people. Black people are still enslaved in Arab, countries, and so I think that that's kind of the reasoning behind it. It's like, okay, I want to be less black, and so I want to be seen as other than black, and in the U.S. especially, where we have a racial caste system, like it's even more pronounced. And so I think that the U.S. is very particularly different than other, countries in the way that it deals with race and the way that
Yeah,
race
yeah, yeah, yeah,
manifests itself and racial identity and the hierarchies. But
yeah.
that's kind of how I see it. I don't know. I would love to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah, the thing is, sometimes some of the arguments you hear, and this is a very Somali thing, and maybe only Somali people would understand it. The way you hear the arguments is like, yeah, but we stemmed from the hierarchy and the tribes and the ancestors originated from Muhammad's tribe. There's nowhere in recorded history about that kind of
Yeah.
connection, which only explains about like when Islam came to the east coast of Africa. Um, and at that time, and Somali people, ancient Somali people, had played a role in slavery of
Mhm.
other black people. They were
Yeah.
kind of like collaborators. That's the amount of
Mhm.
history that I've read that's been written.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot out there to kind of, to talk about this with confidence, and it's just the hearsays that you hear from the community, and very little that is written about it.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is you do post these one-liners that are very on Twitter, that are very point in your face. And do you wanna elaborate a little bit about why you do that, or what's the motivation behind it? Because, for example, sometimes you do post stuff about honor violence.
Yes.
Do you maybe want to discuss what is honor? A lot of people think that honor killings and honor violence doesn't happen within the Somali community. They think it's just a cultural Pakistani, Asian communities that is more rampant. Yeah. But I disagree because it's underreported.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I think, yes, I can definitely talk about that. I've written about it on my blog, and I was threatened with honor killing, not for leaving Islam. So I was still Muslim. Like, it was about dating, a black guy, and that's kind of how everything started, and that changed my life, forever. And I will never forget it. I won't ever forget where I was standing when it happened, when I was threatened with honor killing. And so for me, when I left, it was hard. It's always hard because you're leaving by yourself, and I didn't have any furniture. I didn't have healthcare. It was very scary. But for me, I didn't want to live in fear for the rest of my life. I didn't want to live, wondering, like, is this the day, that's gonna happen? Is this the day they're gonna kill me? Like, and so for me, that was my main motivation, in terms of like leaving Islam, like leaving my family, like just leaving everything behind and starting a new life for myself, which is really hard. And I think that I could have never left. I could have just stayed and never talked about it and never came out publicly about the things I experienced and the abuse that I've experienced. But for me, I just felt like I was living every day, not being free, not being able to express myself, not being able to talk openly and pursue my dreams and travel the world. The things that I want to do, I couldn't do it, right? Because there's always that looming fear. And so.
Yeah, and do you want to get into specifics of like how you've mentioned some things obviously, but do you want to get into specifics of what it was like when you were leaving? Is it right at the time of you feared for your life, or was it something that has been brewing and that was like the camel that broke the I don't know what the expression says, but
yes. No, exactly what you mean. Yeah. I think that I've always wanted to leave, and I've always wanted to like break free and like do things I want to do. And in the US, I think it's maybe it's a US thing where you want to be an individual and break free and like do the things that you want to do and be divorced from the identity of your community. And so I think that's part of it also, like just being having grown up in the US and having always wanted to do that and like live life on my own terms. And so that was part of it, but also like getting the money to do that and, making sure that I was not going to be homeless if I left. It was very important to me. And in the US, there isn't really support for people who are sick, like myself, who are single, don't have kids, I don't have a disability, I'm not a veteran. There's so many things. There are people who are protected, as they should be. But for me, like, I don't have any of those identities. And so there's really no help for me. It's kind of like, okay, we'll just get a job. Right. And so, yeah. And that's like the quintessential American, answer to everything. Just get a job or get two jobs, And so for me, it was working two jobs that helped me make enough money to leave. And I still work two jobs because I have to. And so it's kind of like everything was kind of stacked against me. Like someone like me shouldn't have left because I don't make enough money. I'm not in a high earning field, I'm in a female dominated field. And so everything was pointing to me not being able to make it out. And for me, it felt really great to make it out and be able to live a better life since leaving. And so, but I think, I think about how much harder it was to.
And like social services should be able to understand when there's an issue about honor violence. Did you reach out and then you weren't able to break through, or how did it go?
For me, I waited a little bit, and I got my degree. I knew that would help me in finding a job. And so I kind of was strategic about it. But when I left, like, I remember they did not want me to take my car's title. And in the US, like, when you buy a car and you own it, you get a document saying that you're the owner, and it's called a title. And so my car, like, I remember them being like, no, we don't want to give this to you because we don't believe that you'll keep it safe. We'll keep it here for you. And I remember being like, no, I need my documents. And so just things like that, or threatening to call the police on them, for if I didn't get my documents. So I had to be very drastic, for me to leave. But yeah, social services don't really help people who, like myself, who are single, who don't have children. And I think that the concept of honor violence is so foreign to Americans. Like, I'm like, oh, I could be killed for leaving my religion. They're like, what do you mean? In the US, like, you'll see people who grew up Mormon and then now they're Buddhist. It's so normal to switch your religion, like, in the US.
Yeah.
And so the idea of, like, no, I am afraid for my life, it doesn't register for Americans. So it's just not something. It's incredulous. It's no way could this happen, in the US. And so for me,
it's something that we constantly have to keep repeating to a lot of people and explaining that you don't understand, even if someone is living in a Western country, as it is. Of course, there are Muslim majority countries, Somalia included, where the state and the entire society, it's extremely dangerous to step out of the bounds of Islamic teachings, and even to come out with lack of belief and say I'm an apostate. But even in Western countries, then still there is the family dynamic, the community dynamic, and violence for honor, violence to keep the control. And that's something that I find myself constantly explaining, that yes, that is a phenomenon that happens.
And I think that, like, in the US context, like, one of the biggest, I think, differences between the US and the Netherlands, or Canada and places like that, is socialized healthcare, right? So, like, you can go to the hospital and you don't have to worry about getting a bill, or showing up with insurance or things like that, or citizenship. There's so many things that I feel like in the US are harder than other places. So I've gone about 6 months without health insurance before, and that I made too much money to get government insurance, but I didn't make enough money, and so there's always those people who are uninsured or underinsured. And so I think that that's one of the things that kept me, afraid for a very long time, was, how was I going to do it without health insurance? How was I going to leave? And what if I got sick? What if I got hurt? And those are the realities, I think, of people in the US that people in other Western countries, they are shocked about too, and just as we're shocked about, people who, like, Americans being surprised that people, risking their life to leave their religion. I know that people in Europe and Canada are like, oh my gosh, in the US, like, you can die because you don't have health insurance, and so life is much harder in the US, I think, than other countries, but it does pose that additional challenge, right, of, like, how am I going to leave if I don't make enough money and to afford rent, and I don't have a car, and I don't have, health insurance. Like, those are real things that I have dealt with myself. And so, yeah.
Well, for the issue of ex-Muslims of North America is providing quite a big support to a large number of people, which I think is becoming now a place where ex-Muslims can turn to and say, hey, I'm facing this kind of whatever, at least even with guidance towards organizations, other organizations that are sympathetic or empathetic to the plight of ex-Muslims. I think that's something that we should continually find ways to work together and try and help as many people. Have you ever gone to the Khan Elis?
No, no.
Was there a risk?
Yes, there was always that threat of like, we're gonna send you back. But I think like it's pretty easy in the US to get weapons. And I think that's another major difference between the US and other countries, that it's very easy to just go to the store and get a gun. You know, like you don't need a background check, you don't need
Yeah.
ID. Like, you know, there are places that will just sell you guns. You know, and so I think for me that was when my family told me, okay, we're gonna buy a gun and kill you. I was like, okay, they're serious, and they can, because it's so easy.
Wait,
You know?
what? Your family told you we're gonna buy a gun and kill you?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that actually was said to you.
Yes, yeah, and I'll never forget it. And so I was like, okay, they're serious, and it's really easy because we live in the U.S. and you can get a gun and buy dinner, you know, at the same time. Like it's ridiculous. And so I think that's another reason why fatalities in the U.S. are much higher than other countries. Domestic violence, you know, killing of children, killing of, you know, elderly people with disabilities. Those numbers are much higher in the U.S. than in the Netherlands, Canada, you know, Australia, because there's such an easily accessible way to get guns and other dangerous
the gun situation in the US is absolutely ridiculous. Now, if we go back to like you were living with your family, and now you've moved out and you're living an independent life. Do you still have relationship with your family?
No, I don't. Just because out of safety, I don't feel safe with them knowing where I live, knowing what I do. They do read my blog. They know I have a blog and things like that. But for me, like, my blog was a way to let people know, let the world know that I'm alive and I'm okay. And I think that I've heard of stories of girls being reported as missing, you know, and them using the police to find them and bring them home, you know, and so things like that I've heard of. And so for me, I love like being able to be public and say I'm okay, I'm alive, you know, I'm fine, everything's great, and that way I don't have to worry about them trying to involve the police, you know, and trying to search for me or file a missing report or something like that. But yeah, I'm very happy with my life now, and I have traveled, and I just went to Trinidad and Tobago for 2 weeks, and that was amazing. And I was able to meet new people and see a new country and experience celebration of Black liberation.
Wow, I'm glad you brought it up, because I really wanted. I was looking at the pictures you posted on your social media when you went to Trinidad and Tobago. Awesome, gorgeous. How did that feel? How did it feel wearing that costume and sprucing up like that when that wasn't you before?
Yes.
How did that feel?
It felt incredible. It felt amazing. I felt like it just felt very magical. Like, to be in Trinidad and Tobago for Carnival, celebrating, like, we're marching in the same streets that, you know, enslaved Africans marched on, you know, to fight for their freedom. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible, you know? And so it's rooted in Black liberation. And that's what my blog and my, you know, my work is all about. And so it was very important for me to go there and see for myself what it's like, right? And so I think that's the best part about blogging, is like being able to take people with me to different parts of the world and being able to educate them. I think there are a few people who told me, before your blog, I didn't know, you know, I didn't have a word for this feeling. I didn't know that this was happening in the world. I didn't, you know, and so I think that that's an important part of being public and having that kind of public facing image of like, hey, like, it's okay. You can go and travel by yourself. The world is not that scary. The world, you know, and statistically, I'm actually safer out there than I am in the home. You know what I'm saying? And so there are studies that have shown that women, the most dangerous place for a woman is in the home. The most dangerous person to a woman's life and livelihood is a man, and male into partner. And so that, I feel like I always have to preface that whenever I, you know, travel alone. I'm like, actually, the most dangerous place for me is in the home, you know. And so, and people.
Yeah, I mean, you were just talking about how your family was telling you that they buy a gun to kill you.
Yes.
Uh, and now you traveled to Trinidad and Tobago and you were having grand time. Have you received any, do you receive any online hate for the stuff that you do, the pictures, your views and this and that?
Yes, I think that being a Somali woman with any public uh, social media, or I think it creates a lot of opportunity for people who are clinging on to the oppression of women, the oppression of LGBT people, the oppression of ex-Muslims or non-Muslims, to feel better about themselves and to create that hierarchy that exists in the Muslim world and other parts of the world also. And I think that for me, I do get a lot of questions of like, how did you do it, right? And like, I do get a lot of hate too, but I also get a lot of like, but how exactly did you do
Yeah.
it? And so, and when I tell people, well, I work 2 jobs, then it's like, oh, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to work 2 jobs. Like, and I'm like, okay, well, I did,
Yeah.
and that's what I want. And I was willing to, right? Because my
Yeah.
freedom was so important to me.
Mm.
Um, and I think that, yeah, so for me, the hate that I get, it's gotten less because I think people have gotten tired. And I think it was really bad in the beginning, like when I first started blogging, but 2 years in, it's not really as bad as it used to be. I think that having now being ex-Muslim and like being out about it, I think that makes people like, whoa, like this person is like,
Yeah.
like I don't want to mess with this person because they have all of these like preconceived notions. And so I think that's helped me in a way, being ex-Muslim, but it's also exposed me to other abuse from other communities, right? It was just Somali people or Somali men who were targeting me and harassing me, um, and then it was like non-Somali Muslim, and I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, and they have their own anti-blackness, and so that came out, and I feel like that being ex-Muslim exposed me to that kind of hatred that I
Yeah.
didn't experience before.
And so how do you navigate it when it comes to being public ex-Muslim and the kind of backlash or abuse or harassment that you would get? How do
Um,
you how do you navigate it?
I think that it's very difficult. I mean, for me, it bothers me less now, that I've gotten older, and because I know that they have nothing better going for them, than to harass me. Like, they don't have goals, they don't have things to accomplish, and so for me, I think that I recognize that in my own community. I think in the U.S. especially, Somali people in the U.S. are way more religious than they are, in other parts of the diaspora, and so I think it's particularly more heightened in the U.S. But I don't live in a place with a lot of Somali people, and I don't ever intend to. And although I have in the past, but for me, I do believe in utilizing the law, in my favor, and like filing a restraining order against my family, and things like that I've had to do because my safety is very important to me. I know that I'm
You've
Black.
had you've had to file a restraining order against your family because were they looking for you after you left, or
Yeah,
how
they
did
were.
that come about? Okay.
They were always there. They were always sending me messages on Twitter and creating fake accounts, and sending me emails telling me like, "Oh, we forgive you. um, you can come back." Like, and just a cycle of abuse, right? So like,
Yeah.
it's good, and then the abuse happens, and they're like, "Oh, we're sorry," and then things will be better, and then it goes back, and so. And for me, breaking that cycle of abuse was the first step, right? Was leaving and not participating in it. And then the second step was to file a restraining order and ensure that they knew I was serious, And I think like in our community, we don't hold parents accountable. We're not, told, oh, like your parents can do no wrong. Like you're the person who is, in the wrong. You're the person who is at fault. When in reality, like I don't I don't deserve to be treated that way, and I never will. And the law is here to protect me. and the law sometimes. But I think that it's very important for us to feel empowered enough to go to the law and say, hey, like, I need a restraining order against my family because I'm afraid for my life. You know what I'm saying? And so that's totally okay. And I'm proud of myself. Like, it was very hard to do that. It was a very hard step to take. But that's one of the ways in which people who are experiencing domestic violence are supported in the U.S. is now, like, if they do come within 50 feet of me, I can call the police and they'll be arrested. So it's worth it.
Yeah, I think that because I do see also a lot of young people who struggle with, who face some real danger, who struggle with involving the authority. Of course, there's the whole loyalty to family thing,
Yes.
which is quite general thing. But at the same time, I think it stems from the no snitching and that kind of stuff. And I will translate that because I just spoke in Somali. um, don't air our dirty laundry to the authorities and this kind of thing. And this is something that constantly the children are told, and such that even a person, if they want to detach from their family, they have that guilt that not to involve the authorities. I think that's something that's very common with ex-Muslim Somalis as well. Very, very common. They wouldn't involve the authorities when it comes to this, some real threats.
I think, yeah, and I do, like, my family being immigrant to the U.S., being Muslim, being Black, they do face a lot of, the system will be very harsh against them, right? And so for me, just putting that threat of, like, I filed a restraining order is enough, I think, for them to accept, that they can't treat me however they want to treat me. I'm free. I don't rely on anybody to pay my bills, right? Like, everything I have is in my name. So there's nothing they can do about it, and so I think that for me, my whole life, I never spoke up, I never questioned anybody. I never told anybody what happened to me. I was always, like, taking photos of my family, like, people thought I was, like, a happy girl, who came from a loving family. It wasn't until I broke free that I was like, look at all the things that happened to me that I've been through, and people were like, oh my gosh, like, and there are people who would argue, like, oh, you're lying, like, your family, we know your family, they're nice people. And I'm like, okay, just because they're nice to you doesn't mean they're not abusers. You know what I'm saying? They're nice to everyone except the person that they're abusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's that I people I get online as well. There's somebody who came on the channel in a comment saying, oh, I know where she is from. I know the parents, and she's lying. She's being paid.
Yes, I'm being paid. I just happen to work 2 jobs, but I'm being paid. That makes no sense.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous claim. So I mean, the best we can do is just I scroll through them. But at the same time, it's very important that we repeat this, especially to young ex-Muslims who are in the closet, who are listening, that the threat to your life when it comes to your apostasy, that's something you need to take seriously and not be blind spotted. It can be a blind spot to say, okay, it's just hate, but there are people who can target your online accounts, and they will really, really go at it, and they'll go as far as exposing people's personal information. And we've heard cases of young ex-Muslims in the closet who were targeted this way a couple of months ago, and by some people who are also living in Western countries, and then it becomes super dangerous in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Doxing. That's a term that I've heard, being used, and a lot of people online who are, like, vocal about certain issues, whether it be Black Lives Matter or, the ex-Muslim movement, they do face that threat of, like, being doxxed and having their information and their identity out there. And again, like, people, with the age of information that we live in, it's much easier to find people, and I think that for me, I didn't have to do all this, you know what I'm saying? Like I didn't have to start a blog and be public about my experiences and, you know, and leave, you know, I could have just been quiet and, you know, did what I was told and just like what the ideal woman, you know, of being seen, not heard.
Yeah, it's very important that we bring these issues to the fore and we constantly talk about it. It's the only way to make change, actually. So I'm so happy that you're able to do the kind of work you're doing. And I have to tell my viewers, I've been trying to get you for months.
I know. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Like I'm so happy to talk openly, and there aren't many places or spaces, right, where I'm ex-Muslim and Somali. A lot of people want to hear, and that's another thing I think I can maybe talk about. Like I feel like the atheist movement or, you know, humanist movement is very like white male dominated. And so for me, I don't feel welcomed, right? And I think people will fixate on religion and not talk about
Islam specifically,
or patriarchy or misogyny or anti-blackness, you know, xenophobia, all these things. Like they won't talk about it. They'll just be like, okay, we have this one single issue that we're going to talk about and discuss. And so I think for me, like, okay, well, I'm a woman and I'm Black and I'm an immigrant. Like, what are you doing for those people, right? Or people who are all through you. And so for me, I think that looking at the intersections of all the identities and the ways in which oppression like manifests itself in different ways and different contexts, but I think just focusing on religion alone is not enough for me, you know. And so I'm not just ex-Muslim, like I'm also all these other things, and I have all these other experiences. And so I think that that's one of my critiques of being in that space of like they're very quick to shut down, you know, conversations about misogyny and anti-Blackness, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm still Black and a woman. That is, you know, and so
although I gotta give there's a few people from the skeptic community that are coming up in support of ex-Muslims. Before they were shying away from even discussing Islam in their, let's say, blogs or vlogs or YouTube channels. But now there's a few people who are saying, fuck it, I'm going to talk about Islam as well. And the thing that I still notice, and we still verify, is there's almost always a disclaimer whenever a non-Muslim atheist is criticizing Islam. There's always a disclaimer following that says, but that is also for Christianity. And that, for me, that's where I normally then come in and I say, right now we're talking about Islam. And as much as Christianity and the Bible, there's so many things that are anti-human rights, but these religions have sometimes also throughout history have gone through metamorphosis. Islam, it has not been touched. And Islam is very, very important to a lot of Muslims. So that's my comeback normally is like, no, right now we're going to talk about Islam because that's my lived experience as well, and that these are the issues I disagree with in this particular religion. Of course, I don't support other religions, but right now we're talking about this particular religion. So I do agree with you when you say that.
I think particularly in the US, like post 9/11, people are now willing to talk about Islam openly, right? Like it's very much like, oh, you can't say that because they're oppressed, you know. And it's like two things can be true at the same time, right? Muslims in the US are oppressed because of post 9/11 bigotry, but also a lot of times they are the oppressors themselves in other countries, right? In Muslim majority countries. And look at how, you know, Hindus and Buddhists and apostates are treated in Muslim countries.
Christian minorities in Muslim countries, apostates. I mean, it's way down there when it comes to equality or even basic human rights in that sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I've heard of stories of like Somali Christians in Somalia like practicing in the basements, you know, and practicing in secret because they don't want people to know, you
yeah,
know, about their beliefs. And I'm like, that makes that's such violence, you know? That's terrorism, you know what I'm saying? And so like people living in fear for their belief system to me is just not that's not just and that's not rooted in liberation of anyone, right? And so
yeah. Do you follow any ex-Muslim Somalis who are still living in Somalia, and do you want to maybe highlight uh, uh, any stuff that you hear from them in that regard?
there are a few, I think they're almost always anonymous accounts. Um, and I think that there is one person in particular who lives in Somalia and she is not Muslim and she and I we talk a lot and you know she's a huge supporter of my work and you know and I think for me I'm like if I live in a free country or freer country, right? And I don't really have you know I shouldn't be as afraid. You know, I'm not living in Somalia as an ex-Muslim Somali woman, which is
Yeah,
dangerous, right? I'm like I have my face on YouTube, I have you know my story on my blog. Like I'm not hiding in any way.
yeah.
Um, but even living in the U.S., like you said, there are risks even living in the U.S. with being an apostate. So
Yeah,
it's
and that's why those of us who live in places where we have the privilege to be able to talk with our faces and our photographs. And
Mhm.
by privilege, it doesn't necessarily mean it's like, oh, um, um, it's all free. There are certain steps that you have to take in terms of safety.
Mhm.
I think it's really important that we continue talking. The more of us that are talking, the bigger the pushback is for just basic individual liberty
Yes,
to live your life the way you want to live
without violence.
without violence. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And yeah, I think for me, like talking about it, like the different types of freedom, right? Freedom to leave a religion, you know, reproductive freedom, freedom to make choices about reproductive health, the freedom to move, the freedom to study what you want to study, you know, and these are things that I didn't have growing, you know, in my life until now. So
Oh yeah, and can you talk about you do tweet a lot about the reproductive rights for women to choose not to have kids and that sort of thing, and that's something that I notice you're quite passionate about. Do you wanna give some pointers?
yeah, I think 6 years ago, I would say I had my awakening, right? Like I think as feminists, like we all have that moment that everything
Yeah.
starts to click. For me, it was 6 years ago, and I was interning at a women's nonprofit organization that was fighting for economic justice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the U.S., 2/3 of low-wage workers are women.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge, most low-wage workers are women. That's a big problem and a feminist issue. Also, I was taking a class on reproductive politics in college, and so those two things happening simultaneously, I was like, oh my gosh, right? It was like the theory and the um, experiential together, and
Yeah.
so I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot, and learning about reproductive health and reproductive rights and how um, it's very central. I think it's very important. Being someone who comes from a family and women in my family who were not given a choice, right? Who had to have children because they were here with on a visa, and, you know, and they were afraid to be sent back. And so I think about that. And women in our communities, a lot of women in our communities don't have, you know, choices and options and, you know, opportunities, whether they're in the US or back home. And I think that's because of, you know, Islam and Islam legitimizing marital rape, you know, and there are a lot of problems in like Islam that women are oppressed and, you know, and women are denied rights and liberties. And it's like, okay, you know, I always had a dislike towards Islam, but that was what solidified it for me was the fact that there was no movement, right? There's no reform, there was no progression. It was like, we're going to stay stagnant. forever, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, I can't really call myself feminist, you know, and fight for women's liberation. But also, this religion says I can't travel without my husband or male guardian. I agree with it. You know, it's for my best interest. You know.
Yeah, which brings me to this very controversial subject about the hijab and some Western feminists from uh, the women's march movement endorsing hijab, and there's a lot of endorsement of hijab in several other sectors, including corporate, Nike, and this kind of stuff. What do you think about this? What's your opinion about this?
I think that for me, sometimes I wonder like if we exclude people, you know, certain people who may not have opportunities or, you know, resources, like it may make them more extreme. And I think that's what they want. Like deep down is they want it to be like West versus Islam, you know? And
Yeah.
I think that for me, I do want to see more girls like doing things and engaging in sports, but also they do have a responsibility, right, to not promote rape culture, and that's what hijab is. Hijab is rape culture, right? And so the idea of like having to cover my body to protect myself because men cannot control their urges. I'm like, I've been to places where I wore shorts and bikinis and nobody touched me, you know? And so
Yeah.
I think that they're capitalizing off of it, right? Like they see a need and they're like, oh yeah, like, you know, we're gonna make money off of this. It's always about the um, money to them, right? It's never about human rights or women's liberation or anything like that.
Oh. Well, I have my own opinions about this, and I find it quite hypocritical in the sense
Mhm.
that it almost feels like for let's say white women, they can free the nipple, but for brown or black women, they need to still maintain that identity. I
Mhm.
find it, but at the same time, I do listen to the argument about for women who are being forced to wear the hijab in their home environments, and if if there are no role models who are playing sports, then they wouldn't find someone they can identify with in mainstream. Hence, they just stay at home, and then they don't get to participate and find. I do listen to that argument,
Mhm.
but what you see most of the time is just blind endorsement of the hijab without really understanding what this piece of clothing means,
Yes.
and the history behind it,
Yes.
and how it came about even in Islamic history.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
it came about separating slave women from
Yeah.
uh, you
Free
know
women.
it,
Yeah. Free women. Yeah. Mhm.
exactly,
Yeah.
and that's how it started.
Mhm.
Is there
Yeah.
anything else you wanna add on that?
I definitely agree, you know, and it's rooted in misogyny, right? Because I think even growing up, I feel like the girls who didn't wear hijab were not as bothered, right? People didn't harass them as much because they're gonna go to the dean, right? Like they have some self-efficacy, they have some self-confidence, and so, but the girls who wore hijab were seen as like, oh, she's not gonna report it, you know? She's
Exactly.
she's covered. She agrees with the teachings that she's a second-class citizen and that she is responsible for men controlling their urges, that she's responsible, right? She has the onus is on her. And so those girls were targeted more because, including myself, like I was also targeted. Like they were targeted way more than girls who didn't wear hijab because it was understood that they wouldn't report it.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
the statistics are quite mind-boggling coming from Muslim majority countries. Like recently, I was reading something about Egypt. Statistics for rape cases
mhm,
skyrocketing despite women being and I mean, the thing is, a rapist, whether somebody is covered or not, is is a rapist,
Yeah.
right? But what I see is the same point you were making is also like majority of of rapists were assuming that this woman, because she's covered, she's gonna be ashamed of it. She's been indoctrinated with the fact that it was her fault, so she's not gonna report it. So, and that's a phenomenon that's quite true. And that's a phenomenon I do believe needs to be researched more, and more more numbers and more statistical data needs to be available.
For me, I feel like when it happened to me, I was like, and I told people about it, I was like, somebody groped me, and I was wearing jilbab, and they were like, well, why are you outside? Just don't leave the house, and those things will happen, and so it's like, it's all about, I think, oppressing women so much that they don't go anywhere. They don't make choices about political, they're not politically involved. They're not making economic decisions. They're not taking ownership of their life. They're just there, right? And so I think that for me, when I told people my story and they were like, oh, it's your fault for being outside. It's your fault for showing your face. Maybe if you hide your face, they won't be tempted, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that just it made me a bit sick. But it's something that's there that I am quite aware of. I do also, I dropped the hijab quite a while back on myself, but I do remember the catcalls and the street harassment is actually it was a whole lot worse when I was in the hijab than when I dropped it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So and this is the whenever I see people arguing on Twitter or social media about that, I'm just it's just like anyway. Is there anything we haven't covered, love? Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your travels to the carnival, because I want to show those. I want to transpose those pictures while we're talking.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I was in Trinidad and Tobago February 18th until March 3rd. So I got back right before coronavirus shut everything down. I feel very lucky to have gone because they were thinking about canceling it because of coronavirus, but it hadn't gotten that bad yet. And so back then, and so they decided to go through with it. And I'm grateful. And the best part of it was like meeting Black people from all over the world. And being able to connect and learn from them about their experiences. And I felt very safe. Like I would take their version of Uber around the city by myself. I never had a problem. And
did you join the parade, the carnival? Yeah. Because I've seen a couple of pictures with you with a costume. Were you like? Do you have any videos that I can transpose here?
it was a lot of fun. Like it was, for me, I went there, because I've always wanted to experience Trinidad Carnival. They have Carnival in other places, but Carnival started in Trinidad and Tobago. And then I also wanted to document like what Black liberation looks like in other countries. And so like having gone to Colombia and like seeing what Black liberation looks like in Colombia, and then now in Trinidad and Tobago, and like doing the research about it, right? And like for me, I think it was very interesting because I think I alluded this to earlier, but like the civil rights movement in the U.S. was like the catalyst for all the civil rights movements and independence movements in other countries. So including including Somalia, including Burkina Faso, like all these countries, like they got their independence around the same time, and they looked at the U.S. and what the people in the U.S. or Black people in the U.S. were doing, and they kind of just modeled after them. And so same thing in Trinidad and Tobago, where they looked at Angela Davis and other major figures, and they were like, okay, well, this is what's happening in the U.S. Like, we need to create a replica in Trinidad and Tobago, and and fight for our freedom. And so I think just leveling up consciousness and increasing knowledge and awareness about it is very important to me.
Wow. Wow. Incredible. Not unless there's anything that we have missed you want to add on. I think we're going to wrap it up here. I am so happy you came on. This was absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
I would spend some few days editing, and then I'll post it. And whatever link of your blog, your information, I'll link it in the video description. Thank you, the audience, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yes.
Bye. Bye.